All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Automate 101 webinar. So what we're going to do, first of all, is make an introduction, and then we're going to talk through what we hope you will get out of today. All right. I understand there's some audio feedback.
Yeah, I can still hear you feeding back, Dan. Can you hear me?
Okay, so yes, seems to be just you, Jason. Turn off all your other audio devices. Oh dear.
All right.
Cool.
Give me a sec.
All
I'll
right.
just have to...
So I'll make introductions and do the intro while you frantically unplug and plug things back in. It wouldn't be a webinar without technical issues, would it, guys? So, first of all, good afternoon, good evening, good morning. I'm Daniel from Automate 101. I lead the sales and marketing. And with me, my colleague who you heard speaking a moment ago, Jason Green, who leads our consulting and support. So the reason for this webinar, it came from a lot of feedback that we've been getting from our MSP partners, from our MSP customers, and from a lot of new customers that we have been working with. It's really difficult to onboard customers into your MSP business. When you sign up a new customer, it tends to be an expensive and complicated project. When you're onboarding them, it feels like it's really, really manual. There's a lot of manual technical processes, but there's also creating a lot of manual processes for your help desk to follow, and they seem to be new and different for every customer. If you're using Atria and you're trying to onboard customers into Atria, it's hard to know what tool to use, when to use the tool, and if you do have a tool that you like using, am I using it the best way possible, or am I missing things? And for a lot of you, actually just getting customers into Atria is pretty complex and pretty difficult. We've also started hearing, now that we've moved into managing dedicated or single tenant Active Directories, customers that have their own Active Directory rather than just shared or multi-tenant ones, that onboarding dedicated Active Directories is onerous, and it can feel quite complex. So how can I do that more effectively? And lastly, with our new Microsoft Online service, which our last webinar was about, how do I onboard customers that are cloud only live in Azure AD, or cloud first? Their primary user accounts are in Azure Active Directory. So we've taken all of those and we've created a webinar, and this one's really focused on user onboarding. How do I get customers into Atria as quickly as possible so that they can be managed effectively? So we're going to go through some really common customer scenarios, the types of customers that you'll go out and acquire, and then we'll run you through the tools that we have with each scenario and the most effective tool to use at each time. We'll show you some practical ways to do it, and lastly, give you some tips and tricks, and unfortunately, share some gotchas. There's always gotchas. Right, Jason, are you ready to pick up?
Yeah, sorry, just confirming you can hear me okay?
You've got a lot of echo.
Okay, so that's what I'm hearing, the same from you. So I'm not sure if everyone else on the call is hearing the same. I don't know if we can poll everyone or...
Okay, you keep going, Jace.
Okay, I'll keep going. Alrighty, so as Daniel mentioned earlier, we're going to take a look over the four main scenarios that you can use to quickly onboard users to your platform. For each of these scenarios, we're going to give you the example situation and the most appropriate method to use. We'll also give you a quick look at the architecture and then show you the method in action. To help keep to time and keep things on task here, these demos are recorded. We'll be giving a live feedback over the top, but it's just to keep things on time. They were taken from live demos. You may be familiar with some of these processes we're going to show you, and you may have used them in the past, but this is a great opportunity to revisit each and revise the benefits that they offer. The first scenario we're going to take a look at is a hybrid with a single app. In this one, we will show you how to use AD Sync to achieve this. The second one is a scenario where you may be taking over a whole customer Active Directory and you want to add them to your platform as a remote Active Directory and import the existing users. For this, we'll show you how to use the user directory import tool. The third scenario is where you might have a cloud-only customer or where Active Directory is your cleanest source of user data, and we'll show you how you can import using Azure AD Sync. Our fourth scenario is where a customer might be leaving their existing Active Directory, moving entirely to your platform, and we'll run you through the bulk user import for this one. Now, there is a fifth method. If I click here, and that's the API. The API is super powerful. It has an ability to handle many situations. You can use the API in conjunction with any of these four platform import methods, or you could use it completely standalone. We'll cover this a little later in the presentation and give you some more details on the API. Right, so to take a look at our first scenario here, we're going to take a look at hybrid with a single app. In this scenario, you're considering that you've probably got a customer that operates from their own on-premise Active Directory. They probably manage this themselves, and they want an easy way to consume a single application from your platform. Common examples would be hosted Exchange or potentially a specific hosted application that you host for your customers. It allows users to maintain the same UPN from both directories and keep passwords in sync, keeping things easy for your users. Using this method allows the customer to also be in control. They can easily use group membership to provision their users, and they can do this one at a time or in larger batches. So let's just take a quick look at the architecture. So here in our example, you can see on the right, we have a customer down the bottom with their on-premise Active Directory. We've got two domain controllers in this environment. Our AD Sync client must be deployed on each of the domain controllers in the environment. The reason for this is so that we can capture password resets. A password reset only occurs as an event inside one domain controller. It is shared behind the scenes between all domain controllers, but that capture event is what allows us to keep those passwords in sync. So it's a really good point to take note of. Other settings such as groups or AD attributes, etc., typically are handled by one of the agents in the environment. We have some detailed knowledge base articles for optimum setup of AD Sync, and we always recommend that you read those before starting on any deployment, just to have a good understanding of how the process operates. There's a lot that goes on behind the scenes that makes this thing work. So we'll link some of those articles at the end of the presentation as well that you may find as a useful reference. So, diving right in, we've got our first look here where we'll log into the portal and we're going to set up AD Sync to replicate our users from the customer directory. So first of all, I need a customer. So I have a customer here. If I filter on my AD Sync customers, I'm going to use Sterling Cooper. They have an AD domain of sterlingcooper.ad. If I take a look at services, I can see they've already been provisioned with AD Sync. And one really useful point to note is you can set a maximum number of users for the sync. So you could, if you're only offering 10, 100, 200 licenses to a customer, you can limit them here to make sure they don't go over their limit. So now if we just jump back to users, we're just quickly going to grab one of the admin users here so we can take a look. If we just select one here, probably this guy. Yep, if we open him up and we impersonate him, this is how you would obtain the AD Sync installer. You do it from within the portal by coming to Services, AD Sync Download. And here is the download option that you have available to download the client. Click on Download, the client will download. You can copy it across to your customer's environment, or you could come via the portal from the customer's environment to obtain that. So if we just jump back to our customer again, if we filter them on our AD Sync service, we take a look at Sterling Cooper and our users. We have a bunch of existing users that are in sync. You can note the little up arrow to the left of each user icon shows they're in sync with AD Sync. Here we've got an example user, Andrew Jackson. Here's Andrew at sterlingcooper.ad, that's his UPN. So if we now jump across to Active Directory, dive in there, this is the directory where he comes from. fairly basic Active Directory, all users in the users OU. If we find our example user here, Andrew Jackson, we can see his account here, matching UPN. So he's got Andrew at sterlingcooper.ad. So his own environment, he has that UPN. In our environment, he has that UPN. The password would be in sync. What synchronizes him was that AD Sync user group. The members that are in here are the users that are synchronized from this customer Active Directory across to our service provider Active Directory. So what I'll do now is we'll just create a new user and just show you how this process actually runs. We will create a user. We'll call him Carl, last name Douglas. We'll set his username to be Carl, and we just need to make sure his UPN is the correct one for our customer here. And go next. Set a password. It's really important to make sure you have that change password at next logon. It's that changing of the password that we pick up. A standard sync without a user changing their password, we won't know their password until they do that first change. So another important point to note there. So now Carl is created. We need to we'll give him some extra features just to make sure, extra details, so we can see those sync across. So we'll give him a telephone number, we'll come across here, and we'll also set him a job title. Let's call him a salesperson. Pop that in the job title field, and we'll set a department as well, just so we can see those extra attributes and how they replicate across. Apply, and okay. So the final piece of the puzzle to get Carl into our environment is we need to make him a member of that AD Sync group that we're watching. Users added to this group are going to get synchronized. The AD Sync service obviously makes use of the API, so it's very quick, very fast, easy way to bring users across. So we just have a look in our AD Sync group, double check he's there. There he is. Basically, in the time it's taken us to look in that group, he will already be across in our Atria portal. So just refresh our user list, and here we have Carl. He's got the right UPN, he's set correctly. If we take a look at his settings and edit his user account, we can see he's in sync with AD Sync. It's got the warning at the top there, and you can disable it. All his settings are grayed out. This means that they're coming from Active Directory. So you need to, bear in mind that any changes need to be done on the customer's directory side. But the extra attributes we added there are showing on his user account. So the next thing we would do for a new user, we'd obviously provision him a service. So in this example, we're using Hosted Exchange. We'll give him a mailbox, hit provision, and in a few seconds, he will have his service provisioned. Now, obviously, we could use the multi-user select. If I had brought 10, 20, 30 users in at one time, we could use that as a batch import method, just by adding those users into that Active Directory group and syncing them into the platform. So that is how simple it is for AD Sync.
Perfect. Thanks, Jason. So the next topic that we're going to talk about is taking over a whole Active Directory. Just before we do that, one piece of housekeeping, which I forgot to do right at the start. On the left-hand side of your screen, you should see a Q&A section. If you have any questions as we go through, please answer them. We have a couple of people keeping an eye on questions, and if they're deep enough that we want to have a discussion, we've got time dedicated at the end that we're able to talk about some of those questions. So back to taking over a whole Active Directory. In this scenario, there's a couple of core reasons you may want to do this. You've won a larger customer, a medium enterprise, or a larger customer, and they've decided that they want to keep their entire Active Directory in place, and they want you to start managing it. But you still want to give them all of the self-service capability that Atria has, and you want to give your help desk the same process flow as they have with all of the rest of your customers for user and service management. And this works really well for those larger customers where their existing Active Directory is in pretty good shape. It's relatively healthy, and maybe they've got some complex services in there that don't really fit within your existing, within your multi-tenant or shared Active Directory. The other reason you might want to do this is you might be getting a customer that has some high-level security requirements. So HIPAA compliance for healthcare, PCI compliance for financial services, that sort of thing. So you may want to keep that customer in their own dedicated Active Directory rather than bringing them into your shared environment. So the end result, once you've done this, is you want this customer to look exactly like all of your others in the shared environment, but you want to have them in and managed by Atria, so your help desk gets a nice, robust, easy way to manage them, and you can offer self-service out to that customer. So let's have a chat about how that works. So up the top here, you can see a standard Atria deployment in a shared or multi-tenant Active Directory. We've got a provisioning server, and we've got a range of services, Exchange, SharePoint, Microsoft Online, whatever it might be. Then, in the dedicated Active Directory, and there's only one in this picture, but you could have multiple of them, you deploy a provisioning server, and you deploy the services that you need to manage. It could just be pure AD, managing groups, et cetera, but it could also be managing Exchange, it could be managing Microsoft Online, it could be managing Citrix or RDS solutions in there. Then you connect it to the core, to your core Atria instance, and from there on, it appears just as a normal customer. Now, right now, there are some networking complexities to deploying this, and we're working on making this a little bit, well, not a little bit, a lot easier for you all to deploy. Nonetheless, it's a really powerful tool, and if it's something you're interested in right now, we'd love to work with you to get it up and going. So let's have a look at how this works. So what you can see here is my demo Active Directory. Now, this is a multi-tenant Active Directory, so you can see I've got a range of customers here, and this is how Atria expects to see them. In a normal single-tenant Active Directory, users would be in the users OU, but for all practical purposes for this demo, it doesn't really matter. I have an OU called Don't Belong here. In here, I've got a bunch of users. These users are not managed by Atria. Now, just think about this as either the users OU in a dedicated Active Directory, or they could be in a range of different OUs in a dedicated or shared one. So here I'm showing you a customer called Cyberdyne, and you can see I've got 1,500 or so users already managed by Atria here. And this is the standard format of what Atria expects to see. It's important to know that Atria by default will move users out of this Don't Belong Here OU and put them in the OU that it thinks it belongs, because it's a multi-tenant first solution. And we'll touch on that in a little bit more detail in a moment. So I've pre-created the customer that I want to import these users into, called Greendale Community College. It's really, really important to remember that you're going to be managing lots and lots of customers with Atria. So you're always going to be importing users in the context of a customer, no matter whether you're importing a dedicated Active Directory or a shared Active Directory. So just as before, I've got the standard user that I've created, which is the admin user, and then I'm going to go to the user directory import. This gives me essentially an AD browser. So I expand out my customers. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to show you Cyberdyne Systems, the customer I showed you that was already in AD. When I have a look at them in their user structure, you can see again reflected in there is those 1,500 or so odd users I've already got. What's important to notice is there's no tick box beside those users. Atria already knows about them, therefore is managing them, so you can't re-import them. When I go and have a look at the Don't Belong Here OU, on the other hand, you can see I've got a range of, I've got all of my users have tick boxes, so I can select them to be imported into Atria. Now, again, it's really important that we're importing these in the context of the right customer. If you import them in the context of the wrong customer, they'll be moved to the wrong place. Now, just to be clear, this is going to take these users and it's going to move them into the Greendale Community College OU that I showed you earlier. There is configuration you can do on the back end if you were doing a dedicated Active Directory and you don't want to move users around, you want them to stay in place. And that's absolutely possible. It's just a slightly different method, but for all intents and purposes, it looks and feels the same. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and import these users. And I'm going to pop up to our provisioning requests, and I'm going to show you what's actually happened. So if I look at provisioning requests, I've got my bulk request here, and again, under sub requests, it's going to go and it's going to have grabbed all of my users and imported them. And you can see it successfully imported what? 7 or 8 of them. I've had one that didn't work. That's okay. We're not too worried about Troy today. So they've all been successfully brought into Atria. And if I look at my customers and go back to Greendale Community College, like I showed you earlier, here we go. All of those users are now in there, and they're able to be managed just like any other user. So I can expand them out. I can give them additional services. All of these users, if you have a look at the right-hand side, UPNs have been kept. I can also use multi-user select if I wanted to do bulk user provision to these guys. If I wanted to give everybody, for example, a mailbox, or wanted to give everybody a desktop. But I can also expand them out and give them individual services exactly the same as I can with any normal customer, even though they've just been imported. This is part of the importance of the initial setup that you do. You want to have those services up and running in your dedicated AD, your Citrix management, your AD management, all that sort of stuff, so that by the time you get to import the users, everything just works. So if I pop back into Active Directory and refresh it, you can see in my don't belong here OU, all of my users have disappeared. And then, yes, I need to refresh the customers, refresh this view, and now you can see I've got Greendale Community College, and my user structure has been moved into here. So the UPNs were kept the same, names are the same, we're all good. Really powerful and really easy to do. And the core scenarios here, importing a dedicated Active Directory, so it can be managed by Atria, managed by your help desk, and self-service offered out to your customers. And if you're importing a whole bunch of customers from a legacy multi-tenant Active Directory into Atria, this is another pretty common use case. All right. So the next scenario is importing users from Azure Active Directory. So this is a reasonably new scenario for us. And the two most common use cases we're seeing here is essentially cloud-only customers, small businesses that are pretty much only using Azure Active Directory, pretty much only using Office 365, but you want to bring them into Atria. So you've got, again, one place to manage all of those customers without having to give everybody admin access to your partner center and to your Office 365 tenants, and so that you can do effective licensing and billing. The second scenario is when you're importing a customer that has Azure Active Directory, and you either have limited access to their on-premises AD, or their on-premises AD is really old, really ugly, and to be honest, you just don't want to touch it with a barge pole. Because of all the licensing stuff, Azure AD is likely to be the tidiest way, the tidiest data source they have for all their users. So it's a pretty nice way to get those users into Atria. So how does this look? Again, this works for both shared or multi-tenant Active Directories and dedicated or single-tenant Active Directories. When I look at my service provider shared Active Directory, you can see we've got we have a connection to your partner center. Any customer that's connected to your partner center we can see, and then we connect to that partner center tenant, and we can drag or import the accounts over or synchronize the accounts from partner center into Atria. So let's have a bit of a demo of what that looks like. On the right-hand side, you can see our partner center. So I've got a customer pre-created called Soylent Green, and you can see I've got an admin user called William Simonson, and they've got a on Microsoft domain name, and I've got a bunch of users already created here. Now, one of the important things is that we can also bring over, as well as the users, the different types of licenses that users are using, so that you can start managing them and billing them straight away. It's important you have plans set up in Atria first to support the licenses that the customer has. And I'm going to show you very briefly how that works. We actually have a whole webinar about how our Office 365 service works, and there's a link at the end of this. So you can see my customer Soylent Green here. I've only got the admin user, the same as you saw before. So when I go to their services, I have this Azure AD service. If you want to find more detail about how this whole thing works, do check out the webinar, which will be posted at the end of this webinar. But in this case, I'm going to connect to an existing tenant. Now, it's really important this customer you want to onboard is already connected to your partner center. So now I'm going to search for them. And if I search, you can see I now have the customer Soylent. So I select them, go provision, and then Atria is going to head over to Partner Center. It's going to bring in this customer, and it's going to bring in all the details that Partner Center knows about them, including who signed the contract, their address, all that sort of stuff. But one of the other unique things it does is it brings over the licenses that this tenant is entitled to as well. And that's the very first step on being able to import those users and import the licenses that they have so that they can be effectively managed by Atria. So once Azure AD has finished provisioning, I then am going to go to the Microsoft Online service. And the first thing you can see is all of the licenses that are assigned to this tenant. And you can see I've got Dynamics 365 has been assigned, Microsoft 365 Business Premium, but you can actually see I've got a bunch of available units for Business Premium. This is one of the things managing Office 365 with Atria helps you avoid, because we can provision licenses on demand for direct CSPs. Under Advanced Settings, these are the plans that I've pre-built. So I've got Microsoft 365 Business Premium and Office 365 E3, but I don't have Dynamics. Atria will still import the user, but if I don't have a plan pre-configured for the right license, it won't import that license. So it is important you get this set up to stop yourself some manual work at the end. Now, it's not actually importing those users and licenses yet. That's just setting up the service and access to the plans. What I do now is I pop into Azure AD service again, and you can actually see I've got it's the information that's already pulled through from Partner Center. You can see the domains, etc., etc. But now, when I click Sync Customer with Azure AD, what this actually does is it goes to Partner Center, it queries all of the users, copies the users, their UPN, and a few other details, as well as the licenses that they have, and will provision them with the correct plan if it's available. So and now if I go and have a look at the users for Soylent Green, you can now see all of those users have been brought over successfully. If I pop down and have a look at, you can also see, so William was my admin user because my domains weren't matched up, my UPNs weren't matched up. I now have a duplicate of that. Again, something to keep an eye out for if you're importing users into a customer that you already have some users in. So you can see for Jason here, he had the Office 365 E3 license. That's been brought over. Colin will have the Microsoft 365 license. But when I have a look at Arid, even though I didn't have the Dynamics 365 plan, we've still brought Arid in. It's really important to note that you can have users in Azure AD with no services, with no licenses. We will still bring all of those into Atria, and they can be managed, have services assigned to them straight away. But you can see Arid had Dynamics 365. He now has, because we didn't have a plan for that, it didn't come across. If we actually have a look at the synchronization that happened, you'll be able to actually see here, you'll be able to go through and see what the issue was, and you could see, we didn't actually have a suitable plan match for that. So it's pretty obvious, it's pretty easy, and it's pretty powerful. And again, exactly the same as you saw before. Now that these users are in Atria, I could use our multi-select functionality to give them all additional value-added services that I offer. Could be line of business applications, could be fully fledged remote desktops. There's a lot of things that you could be offering out of here. So really powerful tool, and one of the newest, and to be honest, kind of one of the easiest ways to get users into Atria, especially if your customer has Azure Active Directory. All right.
Okay, thanks, Dan. So I'm going to take a look at the fourth and our final scenario here for migrating Active Directories. So in this example, it's probably one of the most common situations where you might have a customer. You could be taking them off another service provider, so you're not going to be able to get access to their Active Directory, or they have an existing Active Directory that they're wanting to move. Well, they're moving their users entirely to your platform. That AD may be messy. They want to leave behind the mistakes of the past and get things in order before coming into your clean and tidy cloud platform. If they're particularly large, you might also want to consider this method is a good way to batch users in groups for assigning particular applications and services to those users. And we're going to be using the bulk import tool to do this. So let's take a look at the architecture. Pretty simple technical architecture here. It's rather simple. All of the smarts really happens inside the Excel file and the import process itself. So essentially what we're going to do is go to the customer's Active Directory. We're going to get an export of their users. We're going to take that data. We're going to import it to our import file, and we're going to upload it into Atria to create our users for us. So let's take a look at how that goes. Here again, we just need to log into the portal. We'll log in, and then we are going to find our initial customer. I've pre-created a customer to use for this scenario. They've got the name of Science Labs. So SCI will find it, and here we go. This is my customer. I've created them. If I take a look at them here under users, all I have is my initial first customer admin user, the user and service administrator. This is the first one created, and this is where I'm going to import the rest of my users to. So to do the import, we go to users and bulk user import, and it's in here where you will find two templates that you can download, one for specifically new users and one for existing users. The existing user one will also let you import users. So in this example, I'm going to use the existing user template. Clicking on that will simply give you a download to the Excel file onto your PC, and you can use that to input the user data that we're going to import. So in this scenario, we need to go across to the customer's Active Directory and collect their user data. So I'm just going to hop onto the Active Directory server, open up Active Directory users and computers, and we're just going to browse through the directory here and find our customer. So under Science Lab OU, we have a list of users. At the moment, I just have their display names, not necessarily everything I need to know about them. What would be handy is some extra fields. So if I go to View, and I go to add more columns, I can easily add in here, the minimum set I'm going to need is going to be first name, their last name, and their user logon name, which is essentially their UPN. So click OK, that resets my view. If I go back to my customer OU here, I now have 6 columns, which I didn't have before. Nice and organized. I have my first name and my last name and my user login name. Now, these login names are all a bit messy. I've got different UPNs using different domains, different formats for usernames. So what I'm going to do on the way through, I'm going to change those to a standard format of first name dot last name at the customer domain. So now I need to get an export of this, so I can obviously take it to Excel. So if you click the export option up here, choose a place to save it. CSV is a good choice because it easily opens in Excel. Call it a file name that you need, save it. And that's all we need to do to get it out of AD. Go grab our CSV file and we can copy that back to our environment to work with. So let's take a look in Excel and just see how that came. Here is the export. So very much what we saw in Active Directory, 6 columns, name, type, description, and our first name and last name and user logon name field. I'm simply going to copy those first and last name fields across. These ones I'm going to change and make them consistent. I just want a standard logon name for my users as I bring them into the platform. So if we take a look now in our import file, and we use the existing user file, this file has a large number of columns across the top. There's a number of tips on some of these columns explaining what you can do with them. Leaving them blank will do certain actions, setting them will do others. We can see, because it was an export, my original customer admin here, Albert Einstein, is in the file, and we can see a bunch of settings that it's pulled from Atria back into the file for his settings. I've simply copied my first name, last names into here, display names, and I've done an edit here to put the UPN in. You can use some wildcard formulas here to create those usernames. It does understand some of those features, so that's also an option. One other key point to note here is when you import a user, you really need to set their first password. Our existing user, if we leave that blank, his password won't be touched. But because we've set a password and we can hand this out to our new users when they first log on, I've configured that. A couple of other useful fields, things like location, department, and these custom fields 1 and 2. I've used the custom field 2. It's really handy, a way to batch your users into the platform. So batch 1 and batch 2, I'm going to be able to search for those batch numbers once I'm in the platform and use that for assigning services to users. So if we just quickly find our way back to Atria and here, and we're going to upload our file. So all we need to do is, on the same window we're at before, choose File, grab the file for our user import and open it up. Click Upload. Now this isn't uploading the users or creating the users yet. This is simply putting the file in the platform. You can expand it out, see when you uploaded it, who uploaded it, basic details of the file. If you click the import process here, this is moving on to importing the users. So in this list here, we can see our list of new users, the ones I'm intending to import, as well as our existing user is available. You also have here available the option for the multi-select. So if I don't want to bring all these users in right at this time, I can do some, and then I can return back to my file and I can import the rest later. So clicking Save is going to fire off the import process. And down here, we're going to see a shortcut to the provisioning log that's going to show me those users. Below sub requests, I can see my users provisioning for already green. By the time we click away from this, they'll all be there. If we click on users, they've all arrived. Just clear that menu out the way. Right, so if we take a look at one of the users that we've imported here, and we edit our user, you can see they've been imported, first names and last names are there, but here that custom field 2 that I used, and I can see my batch 2 reference. This is going to be handy now for when I go to assign my services, which I can do now. First part of that will be to enable the multi-user selection. That gets me my tick boxes, and if I scroll all the way to the bottom under advanced search, I can specify my custom field 2. For this one, I'll do the batch 1 users, search, and now I'm filtered to just those users that were set for batch 1. I can multi-select all of those users, and I can go to services, and I can provision them a service. Simple example, we'll give them Citrix for now. A few more seconds, that will provision that service out to the users, and go green. There we go. So if I return to all users now, I can see my multi-selection was just on those 5, and to the right, I now have ones for the users that all have the Citrix service. I can now proceed to batch 2, maybe give them a different application, a different service. So a really nice, easy way to bring users onto the platform. It gives you a chance to refine the data that you're bringing in, as well as a very powerful way to do the multi-select. Right, I think back over to you, Dan.
And as Jason alluded to in the introduction, and the API. And the reason we've kind of kept the API a little bit separate is that the API is not an either or, unlike most of the rest of these. The API is definitely something that plays nice with all of the scenarios that we've just run through. So the API is definitely more complex than the scenarios we've just shown you, but it's also very, very powerful. So some really common scenarios that you're going to want to use the API is when you want to automate the creation or import of users, and you want to do some automated transforms at the same time. You can absolutely script that and use the API to do that. If you want to do some more complex things rather than just importing users and then going and provisioning services. So for example, if you wanted to bulk provision a bunch of users and give them access to services at exactly the same time. Another scenario which is somewhat common in government or larger enterprise is if they have a workforce management or HR tool. They may want to use that to send requests to Atria for provisioning. Again, that would be the API-led scenario. But just bear in mind that you could use the bulk user import so that you could do some nice batch processing, or you could use AD Sync so that you're getting users brought over under your control. And then you could use the API after either of those things to do some additional provisioning. So the API can be kind of as simple or as complex as you want. So some common things that you're going to want to be able to do, and just I will be pretty frank here, we don't have a demo of doing stuff with the API because in general, doing things with the API doesn't make for the most compelling demos. So we've just got a couple of examples here. So you could import users that already exist in an Active Directory into Atria using the API. Have a script, call the AD, import the users. You could have a script which crawls through a CSV or some other repository of users and user data and goes away and creates them in Atria as well. But that's kind of replicating what we've already done. So what about new scenarios? So one of the really common scenarios we get asked about is about importing groups into Atria. And this really, this applies either you're migrating users out of a legacy or old Active Directory into either your shared or a new dedicated Active Directory you've created them, or it's a dedicated AD and you're taking over it. So you can use the API to import existing groups into an AD into Atria, so they could then be managed by our Citrix service, or they can be managed using the standard group management functionality into Atria. As well as creating new groups and putting users into those groups. You can also do multi-step bulk service provisioning. So if you had a standard profile for sets of users, vaguely similar to what Jason showed you with the multi-select, where he searched for users with the field batch 2, etc., you could have users with a certain criteria and provision them with, with Citrix, with App 1, App 2, App 3, and then a different set of users with App 3, App 4, App 5. So the API is a really powerful tool. It's well worth spending some time in the knowledge base having a look. And our guys are always keen to have a chat and help you work through some of those API led scenarios to extend the way you're onboarding users and customers. We are considering doing almost a pure play API training session as well. So if you've got feedback on that, we'd love to hear it. Jace.
Great. All right. So just in summary, we'll take a look back over the 4 that we showed you through. So the first was AD Sync, really great for that hybrid scenario where you've got the customer directory where they're living in and they want to consume a service from your environment, keeps passwords in sync, gives you an option for batching by loading users through the group. The user AD import, that was a scenario for a full takeover of a directory. It's a dedicated AD and you're going to manage it in place. The newer service, Azure AD Sync, really great for those cloud-only customers, an environment where you've got limited access, or oftentimes the cloud directory is the one that's the tidiest. People keep things in order because of the licensing that goes on there. Yeah, really good option for that. The bulk import was the last one that I showed you, and that's good for migrating in customers that you're taking over from other environments. If the data source is messy, gives you an opportunity to tidy things up, and also provides, again, that nice batch import process. So Yes, and of course the API can sit across all of those. So in conjunction with one or many of them, you can build a solution that will do the job that you need. Here's a list of the articles. We'll link these off in the email that we'll send out following up this webinar. But there's a lot of good information amongst these, a lot of good key reading. It's worth having a read up before you dive in and start doing some of these imports, because it's always good to get it right first time. All right.
So thank you all very much. We really, really appreciate your time. Unfortunately, I haven't kept an eye on the Q&A, so let's pop out and see if there was any interesting questions which came up. Cool. Okay. So
Like anything.
I think we pretty much covered off most of what was asked. So we really appreciated everybody's time. We're going to give you back 10 minutes of your day. Any feedback you have for us, please provide it. Should have put my email address here, but I didn't. Daniel@automate101.com or Jason@automate101.com. We'll also be sending out a copy of this webinar to you and everybody else that registered but was unable to attend, with that recommended reading on the back of it. So feel free to get in touch with us off the back of that. And we're always keen to help you become more efficient at onboarding your customers, and anything we can do to help you do that, whether it's working with our team or whether you've got product suggestions, we're very keen to hear. So again, thank you all very much for the time, and we look forward to working with you in the future.